So we're going to look at Part D, and just as a matter of introduction, just when does the building or works to an existing building need to comply with the building regulations? So we talked about it early on. So under the building regulations, Article 3.1, subject to Article 2, these regulations apply to works or buildings as regards to material change of use takes place, or works commence or material change of use takes place on after the date referred to Article 2. That's the installation or the starting date of the building regulations. And two definitions underneath: buildings include a part of a building, any class or classes of structure prescribed by the minister to be a building for the purpose of the Act, and works include any act or operation in connection with construction, extension, alteration, material or renewal of a building. So the building regulations apply to all buildings except for the exempted classes in Schedule 3. And there's an extract from the Bringing Back Home's Frequently Asked Questions document, which I encourage you all to have a look at. It shows you which building classes are exempt from building regulations. There are particular classes. Generally, it is any building that is habitable for human habitation or for people who work in them will not be exempt. Most of the classes here are to do with storage of animals, etc. So you look at that list. If you're not on that list, the building regulations apply. Doesn't matter how big the building is or how small the building is. So that's something you have to be careful of. And also just to say that there is relaxations and dispensations, which we'll go into later on in respect to those. So the Building Control Act, we have the sections design and construction of buildings and works. So there's means of compliance. The prima facie means of compliance is a technical guidance document. We have alternative means of compliance. We have code of practice. We have standard recommendations. We have ACDs, or acceptable construction details, Irish standards, Irish argument certificates, alternative national technical specifications, which give an equivalency to the Irish standards, and by design. So the functional stated aim of the provision is to illustrate what the purpose of the regulation is. Does not deal with how that regulation is complied with. So the focus is on the ends, and allowing the designer to determine the best means. And just to note, it came up before, that when you're applying the building regulations, you have to do it in such a manner as to avoid breaching any other requirements of the schedule, and no work should be carried out to a building that would cause a new or greater contravention in the provision of these regulations. So we'll look at the technical guidance documents, and Owen touched on them earlier on, that when you go to the technical guidance documents, if you're working on an existing building, what I would say to you is get the PDF, type in existing, and press return, and you'll see all the different parts of the technical guidance documents that note existing buildings and where certain technical guidance might differ under when you're applying it to existing buildings. So we look at TGGs. It says existing buildings and works to existing buildings where we have material alterations or change of use or a change of use of existing buildings. And just note that guidance in this document may not, in all circumstances, be appropriate. And then it goes on to say that they may be, if you follow the technical guidance documents, it might be unduly restrictive or impractical for protected structures and proposed protected structures and other buildings of architectural or historical interest. So again, look at those relaxation of those parts of technical guidance documents which say you may be able to demonstrate compliance in a different manner. And again, these situational alternative approaches based on the principles contained in the document may be more relevant and should be considered. Okay. So that's the building regulations. Again, we talked about bringing back homes and the SIPC guide there. So we have all the technical guidance documents. We have the code of practice. We have the D, and we have various different supplementary guidance. And just to note, under all these things, there's always a proviso that we expect these to be works to be carried out by a competent person. We'll go into that in more detail in Part D. And this person is deemed to be competent by having regard to their task he or she is required to perform and taking account the size and complexity of the building or works. The person possesses sufficient training, experience and knowledge appropriate to the nature of works they're undertaking. So just to say, all building owners or owners of works may be requested to demonstrate compliance with Parts A to M of the building regulations. So if you've undertaken works, even if they're notifiable or not, you may still be required by the Building Control Authority to present information to demonstrate compliance with all the building regulations. So we go into Part D, which is the subject of this talk. So Part D is quite a short regulation. Has two requirements and one definition. So we're going to concentrate on the first requirement, which is all works to which these regulations apply shall be carried out with proper materials and with workmanship and in a workmanship-like manner. That is very important because it illustrates that this requirement is universal. So any works where you are bringing materials onto site to do works or buildings must comply with Part D and must be proper materials. And on the definitions, as highlighted there, it says proper materials, and it illustrates it under A, has a CE marking, or B, has an appropriate technical standard, or a European technical assessment, and it must comply with may comply with an Irish standard, Irish argument, or similar specification under the Agreement for European Communities. So just to note, all works when these regulations apply to be carried out with proper materials in a workmanlike manner. So I've highlighted three of the paragraphs in the technical guidance document, and we'll go through those now. So the first one is on materials. It's in the general, and it just says materials, including products, components, fittings, items or equipment, backfilling excavations. Materials should be of suitable nature and quality in relation to the purpose and the condition of their use, and should be applied and fixed to perform adequately the function that they are intended. This comes back to where we talk about buildings being robust. So where you're talking about cladding or the fixings of cladding, where we're looking for a building have a lifespan of 60 or 60 plus, the things used to fix cladding, materials, anything else must be of a similar robustness. So should be 60 years as well. There's no point having something that's glued on with a chemical adhesive that's going to stop working after 30 years if the actual lifespan of the material it's applying is 60. So those things have to be taken into consideration. And then the fitness of materials under 1.1 of the technical guidance documents. It notes that when you're assessing the fitness for use, you have to be consideration of should be given to durability, safety, local climate conditions, e.g. wind-driven rain, humidity, etc., and other such issues. So also, when you're considering it, you'd be considering where it's being used in the building. So it mightn't be particularly relevant in this particular case, but if you're using steel in a swimming pool, it's a lot different to the steel that you have to use in an industrial building because of the conditions of that use. And those things would have to be considered by the designer. And then on the workmanship, it states, and this is the requirement of the building of the TGG, and this would be something that the owner or the builder or designer would have to ensure to comply with the technical guidance documents, is that the workmanship is a proper standard, and that people are competent and they possess sufficient training, experience and knowledge in regard to the size and complexity of such works. So all those things are in Part D. So it's essential that materials have a CE marking or to an appropriate standard, and that when they're being installed, they're installed by a person who is competent and has sufficient knowledge of the material, experience and training that they are installed correctly. So under requirements part D, part 3A notes that it should bear a CE marking in accordance with provisions of the EU construction product regulations. And then just to note, the CPR, the construction product regulations, requires harmonized products to have a declaration of performance. Declaration of performance provides information on the performance of a product in accordance with an EU and EN harmonized standard. And we'll note that the drawing up the DOP, which is the declaration of performance, the manufacturer assumes responsibility for the conformity of the construction product with declared performance in the DOP. Each construction product covered by a harmonized standard or for which a European technical assessment has been issued must have a DOP and must be marked with a CE marking. So just to note, CE marking in the case of construction products is in conformity with the declared performance and has been assessed in accordance with the harmonized standards, or the ETA that were issued for it. So again, there was discussion earlier on about plywood. When you get plywood, it should have a CE marking to the harmonized standard, and also have a DOP stating what the different performances of that plywood is. Again, how you would put in that plywood into a construction is part of the design. So for instance, 12mm plywood will have a CE marking, you can go and buy it, but it's not suitable for use for flooring because it's too thin. So the CE marking does not mean that a product is automatically suitable for the purpose that people put it to. So if you look at Part D, requirement 3B, so to comply with appropriate harmonized standards or European technical assessments in accordance with the provisions of the construction regulations. So example here is ISEN 13242, 2002, aggregates for unbound and hydraulically bound materials for the use of civil engineering works and road construction. And it has to comply with the national provisions SI 21, which is the national guidance for the application of that particular standard. So and it incorporates Annex E, which goes to T0, T1, T2, and T3, which are different types of hardcore. On the right-hand side is a breakdown of the different types of hardcore that are required. And then in the insert on the bottom left-hand corner, it shows an extract of Technical Guidance Document C, which relates directly to the provision of hardcore bolete slabs, and notes that you have to permeable layer of T2, which is for gas permeable underneath the radon barrier. So when you're getting delivery of aggregates on site, you should have a DOP and a CE marking, possibly in one document, that is received by the builder to illustrate that the product that has been produced on site complies. So even if you're doing a small extension, it's essential that you get your builder or your designer to ensure that they've correlated all these CE markers and DOPs, because as an owner or designer, you may be asked to produce these to illustrate compliance. There's a brief one on technical, European technical assessments. So that's another way of getting a CE marking. So CE markings are based on harmonized standards in general, but there is a secondary route where a manufacturer might go for a European technical assessment, and that provides an independent European procedure for assessing essential characteristics for non-standard construction products. Again, it's a new product or a product that doesn't have a harmonized standard. The manufacturer can go through this process, and at the end of the process, they can produce a CE marking, the DEOP. Again, that has to be reviewed by the designer or one of an owner's representative, at least, to ensure that the product, the DOPs, are suitable for use in the situation that it's being put into. So you might have an ETA for a cement board for Germany, which is perfectly good for German climate. The DOP wouldn't pass muster in Ireland because we have a different climate, we have different requirements, so it would have to be assessed against the location that it's being used. So just to show the difference between market surveillance and building control. So we have the harmonized standards, we have EDTs, EDAs rather, and AVCs. They all feed into the DOP and CE marking. And that all that does is illustrate that the product has been being manufactured to a certain standard, and that the manufacturer is manufacturing it in accordance with those requirements. And the legislation is the construction product regulations, and then the responsibility of the compliance with that particular material is the economic operator. But then when you get to placing it in the construction, you have to look at the use. You have to take into consideration the national provisions, the SRs, parts A to M, technical guidance documents A to M. You have to look at the DOP and CE marking. Does it actually comply with those requirements? Is it compliant with the building regulations? Is it fit for the purpose that it's being used for? And is it being put together in a workman-like manner? Is the workmanship up to scratch? And has been properly installed? And then those legislations are the Building Control Act, building regulations, and responsibility for the compliance of that material is for the owner, builder, specifier, designer, and certifier. Once it's been installed, they are taking that responsibility. If the product is faulty because of the manufacturer, it relies on the manufacturer. If the incorrect product was put in by the owner, designer, or builder, it is responsibility of them under the Part D. So requirements of Part DC, so comply with appropriate or standard Archimedes cert, for which alternative national specifications or any state to which the contracting party of the agreement on the EU economic area was provides for the use of equivalent level of safety. So the Irish standards, so we have the IS 440, for instance, for timber frame. You have Archimedes certs, which are given for usually systems. So for instance, external wall insulation. The other Archimedes cert that would be common would be for radon, because that doesn't have a European harmonized standard, so radon barriers fall under Archimedes certs. So you can have further information can be found at the NSAI. The alternative standards, which show an equivalent level of safety and stability. So you can use, there's three there, there's BRE, Global Assistance, MF approvals, and National Standards Authority, if aren't. They are all technical assessment bodies, and they can be used to undertake a technical assessment under the, for an ETA, under the European Organization for Technical Assessment. So D is all about workmanship materials. Again, that's just repeating the requirement. So we have D1, all works, producer regulations supply, to be carried out proper materials workmanship-like manner. And then we just go into technical design D, we just note again, for materials being likely to be adversely affected by condensation or by moisture from the ground or by airborne moisture, such as rain or snow, the construction should prevent the passage of moisture to the material, and the material should be treated and otherwise protected from moisture. Again, that leads to storage on site. So where you're looking at storage on site, blocks are not meant to be wet in general. They should be stored in a wet area. Then you see on the left-hand side, those blocks are sitting in standing water. By capillary action, the water is going up into the block themselves. That can have detrimental effect on the blocks. If there's a cold weather event, there might be freeze-thaw action. Blocks have no declared performance for freeze-thaw action. So you have to ensure that they're protected, that they're covered, and that they are not exposed to extremely cold weather. Similarly, they shouldn't be installed while they're wet, because if they're installed while they're wet and they're sealed in by plaster or etc., that moisture still has to get out through the structure, and that might lead to mold or other issues or efflorescence or etc., which will affect the quality of the building. Again, on the right-hand side, there's an extract, there's an advice note from the ACEI about structural blockwork under SR 325. Again, we look at moisture and storage. We have materials stored on site where the windows were open, rain is coming through, you got gypsum, boarding here on the left-hand side, which is already showing signs of mold on the bottom left-hand side, even though it hasn't been completely finished yet, because those materials have been left out. And under the paragraph insert on the bottom left-hand side, it says flooring should not be carried out until the dwelling has been glazed and substantially watertight. Again, because of speed of construction, those things are sort of avoided or shortcut, and they just proceed with installing materials where the building is not watertight, and that can lead to issues later on. And a note on the right-hand side, gyprock has, our product should not be used in continuous damp conditions or in buildings that are not weathertight. And it notes that if there's extensive damage, it might need to be replaced. Again, some, especially gypsum materials, if they're exposed to water for a long time, the characteristics of the plasterboard changes and they're no longer fit for use and may need to be removed, especially where you're looking at specialist fire boards, etc., because the manufacturer may not stand over those boards if they got too wet. Just on, so the block work is covered by SR 325. So it talks about the durability of masonry, and it talks about the exposure to weather, to minimize it, to ensure that it isn't getting wet when it's installed. So if that does happen, what happens, you have to get the gridding through of block work through render because it's wet, trying to get the water out. You have effervescence on internal walls where moisture is escaping. So it just goes to the fact that these materials weren't properly stored. They've been installed, and now those issues are coming back. If that was plastered, you might get salt crystals behind the plaster, and you might get it bubbling out. Again, when we look at protection, so this is a refit of Westport House, where they actually, during construction, they cover the building. So the building was covered so they could work on it. So the materials weren't exposed to weather during the construction. That's slightly excessive, but when you're talking about buildings where you're talking about internal finishes which aren't meant to be exposed to water or rain or moisture, if you don't protect them properly, you may cause issues later on, especially if it's plasterboard. You have issues with metal studding where the studs start rusting, etc., and there'll be other issues which may arise. Again, just some work in detail. So this is a party wall. So there's a requirement under Part E to, on the left-hand side, you see the keying of the party wall with the cavity wall. That hasn't been done on these in the left-hand side one. And then you have rebates being taken out for sockets. Those walls should not be rebated if they're party walls. And this might be a case if you're extending two houses at the same time, you will have a party wall. You have to ensure that that party wall is in compliance with Part E. Again, just noting the different bits. Workmanship, you can actually put your hand in some of the horizontal joints, so they're not fully filled. They aren't in compliance with Part E, and by reference, Part D as well. So we just have a quick look at Part G, J, and H. They are slightly different to the other regulations. We say that if you refurbish any of these services, whether it be during material alteration, new build, or material change use, that anything is replaced will have to be replaced to the standard of G, J, and H, as opposed to replacing it by a similar like-by-like replacement. So, for instance, under Part G, where existing WC suite comprising of a closed couple cistern and pan has been replaced by a manual flushing device, it should be a dual flush facility as described. If the flushing cistern alone is changed without changing the pan, you just have the same flushing device. But if a single flush should not be replaced by a dual flush unless the pan is remaining. So if you change the type of suite, you have to change the flushing device. But if you're changing the header tank, so to speak, you don't have to. Then we look at G in regard to cold water systems and pipework. Again, if you're replacing the cold water system in the attic, You have to comply with the requirements. You have to require with the insulated requirements on the diagram there, diagram 3. And then, again, all the pipework in the attic has to be insulated to protect it for 12 hours. And those tables are in the guidance. I'm only taking bits and pieces out of the guidance. I would suggest to you all that you should look at these guidance documents, and they're written in plain English, and they're quite accessible, and they're on the department's website. Again, when we're looking at Part G, just going to go ahead to Part G. So for instance, Part G gives you a definition of how much water you should have in the case of a dwelling with 3 bedrooms. So if you're increasing your bedrooms from 3 to 5, you would have to increase the tank. And if you increase the tank, you have to do all the works have to be in compliance with the technical guidance document G. Similarly, if you're increasing the amount of occupancy in your house from 3 to 5, say, you will have to look at your septic tank, look at the code of practice, what to say regarding the capacity of your septic tank, and you'll have to upgrade it to comply with Part H. Again, we'll be looking at chimneys, flues, etc., where they're being replaced. You have to make sure they're cleaned. If you're installing a new boiler or replacing an old boiler, you have to ensure that the carbon monoxide is installed under 152, or a new or replacement open flue or flueless combustion appliance not designed for cooking purposes is installed. Carbon monoxide that should be provided in the room where the appliance is located, and either inside each bedroom or within 5 meters of the bedroom door. So if you're replacing your boiler, you will have to replace your carbon monoxide alarms or install them in compliance with the Part J. Again, I don't know if you can see it on the bottom left-hand side there, there's an oil tank that is cantilevered off a wall in an existing condition. That's obviously not in compliance with the regulations, but if it was to be replaced, they would have to replace it in compliance with Part J. They couldn't just put the one back up again. Not in a sort of, there's no new or greater contravention. No, you have to comply with the new technical guidance documents. Again, there's documentation about bunding, about the storage of tanks where they have to be located. Again, on the right-hand side, there is a diagram just showing where all the different flue locations can be taken out in relation to windows and other flues, and the details of the dimensions are there as well. So if you're putting a new flue in, you have to comply with these regulations. And just on the bottom right-hand corner, where we talked about commissioning, it's essential that the building owner is given all the commissioning certs and given all the instruction manuals for any of the systems that are installed, be it heating systems, ventilation systems, drainage systems, air recovery systems, whatever they are. Those all have to be contained in a maintenance manual so they can look at it, know what they have, and know how they can be maintained. Again, I won't go into this, but under Part L, it goes into how if you're not replacing your boiler, what's the requirement. Under the requirement of Part L, it says it has to be a 90% boiler. There may be occasions where you can't get a 90, you can't replace the boiler because of access issues. So in the document on the right-hand side, there is a flow chart, so allowing you to assess the procedure and whether you should replace it or if you're able to maintain it. It would be usual that if it was an existing one, that as soon as it comes to end of life, that you would replace it with the correct boiler. But it might be that in the interim, if you're just doing a small extension, that you can leave the existing boiler in place until that one is replaced. And that's it for me.